Yeah, I would say that a fear of rejection is probably one of the deepest and most integral fears that I have.
I already had an embodied idea of the type of impact it can have on people if I shared my story. Like, I don't know where I'm going, but there's nothing left. There's nothing left for me here.
Say the only thing worse than a drunk is a sober drunk.
On one hand, I see how afraid I am, but on the other hand, I know how much this can impact people. So the awareness of the impact was greater than my fear.
Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Eli Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side.
All right. Welcome, Moishe.
Thank you, Ali.
Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I'm sitting here with Moishe Chanin. Moishe and I go back about 20 plus years. We were in yeshiva together in Mexico City, Mexico. But I would say we lost contact after that, and where you came back into my energetic field was when you started sharing your story, something I'm very passionate about, sharing your story of recovery from alcohol and I believe weed as well.
Yeah.
And as you started sharing that story, I noticed the changes, not only in yourself, but in the community and in the conversation. And I'm a big proponent of the power of personal story and what that can do. And you're a living embodiment of that. So I'm excited to sit here with you and introduce you to more of the audience here and see what comes of it. So welcome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ali.
So what was that? Let's talk about that process of the story, the decision to step out and say, I'm going to share my story, because it is uncommon. And I wonder if some of the reason it's uncommon is because of the Alcoholics Anonymous umbrella. It's anonymous. We are anonymous. Even people who are in the program and recovering, very often they're in the background. And you chose to say, and I did as well, obviously not the same addiction, but I did as well to say, hey, I'm going to share my story publicly. So what was that process like, and how did you go about that?
Everything I'm going to share, I think probably for the entire conversation, is just going to be my perspective. So I'm not speaking on behalf of any of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the addiction industry or anything. Everything I'm saying is just my experience, and me not sharing had nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. It had nothing to do with Anonymous. I had already by that time I had already experienced. So we're talking about 5 years ago. Neshamas, which is the organization I do a podcast with and have been involved in. Unfortunately, there were people passing away due to untreated addiction or mental illness.
So people passing away specifically within the Jewish Orthodox community of Crown Heights in Brooklyn.
Yes.
You're part of. Okay.
Yes.
So you're seeing that happening, and you said, I got to do something.
Specifically, the physician, Dr. Rosen, he was the one that was like, okay, I'm going to take it upon myself to do something about it. And he started meeting with a few people and eventually invited me to the table.
He was the one who started the Neshamas organization.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Which it caters to the Crown Heights community, and we're happy for everybody to benefit from it. But the focus is to cater to the Crown Heights Jewish community and educate them and try to empower them as much as possible to avoid what was happening. And
we say people passing away, suicide, drug overdose.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. It was specifically one person's overdose and death, unfortunately. That was the straw. And he's like, that's it. I'm done. I'm doing something about it. Nobody else is.
Right.
So, by that time that they invited me to the table, I was already in sobriety, and I already experienced sharing my story with people individually or even in groups and seeing how it impacted them. To the extent that I was in the outpatient right when I came out of rehab. I went straight to an intensive outpatient, and I shared something at one of the first groups that I was there. And at the time, I was actually telling my sponsor, my 12-step sponsor, like, what am I doing there? I really feel like I don't need to be here. I already know everything that they're talking about. I've already processed all this stuff, because from the first day one when I came to rehab, I was like in. I wasn't fighting. I was in.
The
I was
surrender happened
participating.
before.
Yeah, I surrendered. I was in. So by the time I came to the intensive outpatient, I was kind of ahead of the game. And I was telling him, like, what am I doing here? He's like, it's not about you. Just go. Maybe there's something for you to give, not for you to get.
When you say ahead of the game, meaning most of the other people who were there hadn't surrendered. They were still fighting.
Yeah, they were still relapsing and still talking about like, cravings and things like that. And at the time for me, it was just like, I'm not even considering any of that. I just want to work on myself as a person, improve my relationships and just strengthen my sobriety, which was kind of already established. So I was only in that group for like maybe a month or two. About 7 years later, somebody came to me in the middle of at the end of a meeting. He's like, dude, I just want you to know that there's something that I had kept a secret my entire life, and it was at the core of all of my problems, all of my mental illness, all of my dis-ease, and just seeing you share that gave me the courage to bring it up to my therapist, and I ended up working on it. So I just want to thank you. And I'm like, whoa, okay.
Are you comfortable sharing what that detail is?
It was, I'm not comfortable, but I'll share it because I think it's helpful. Okay. But it was like, when I was younger, nobody sat me down. I'm not complaining, but I wasn't sat down to be taught anything about sexuality. And I discovered sexuality through finding pornographic material in my house. And that led to things that I was very ashamed of. Okay. So when I shared that, he heard me share that. I had no idea. He ended up getting tons of help, whatever he needed. And he didn't meet me until like years later to tell me that how much that impacted them. So enough experiences like that I already had an embodied idea of the type of impact it can have on people if I shared my story. So once we started Neshamas, they wanted to make a...
Can I ask you, were you more comfortable sharing that? Because I've shared some of my own sexual shame around that.
Possibly. Yeah, very possibly.
Right. That's the theory, right? That's the running theory, that as we share that, more people are willing to do the same.
Yeah.
So proof positive. We've just witnessed.
Yeah, there's proof positive, and there's also like a certain trust that's been able to... You and I having this conversation right here, there's a mutual understanding that we're stepping into on a spiritual path right here. This is on a spiritual path. Like before we started, I closed my eyes and I asked God to help me set aside anything that I think is supposed to happen here so that I can really just do his will and share whatever message. So there's a certain trust that comes with that I trust that it's going to come out of my mouth in a way that nobody's going to get hurt in the process.
Trust in the third step.
Yeah.
Got it. Trust in the process.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
But it for sure has an effect, the fact that you did that you shared your story.
Understood, yeah.
So we wanted to do a launch for the Neshamas organization, and we wanted to create a resource fair. So just let the community know what type of resources are available. And my idea was, let's have some people share their story. So I was able to recruit 2 people. Somebody else recruited another person, and they wanted one more person. And they were encouraging me to do it. And I was kind of avoiding it.
So you're recruiting others, but you...
Yeah, that's what was happening.
Perfectly.
Yeah, that's hilarious. And I one day I was like, okay, I'll do it. I was plagued with fear.
Sure.
I was plagued with fear. Tons and tons of anxiety.
Do you remember what some of those fears were?
I think there's a certain point where I was so anxious. I didn't even have the luxury of thinking about what I'm afraid of. My entire body was just so tense, and I was just trying to, I was just praying all day, and I had like one song on repeat over and over about, it's my time. It's my time. It's actually, that's the name of the song. It's called My Time. Oh. By Menachem Weinstein. Check it out. It's great.
I have a song for these things also. listened to a song by Shlomi Shabbat called Ein Od Milvado, and that's my song.
Oh, okay, cool.
Before I go in.
Okay. Yeah. So,
Ein Od Milvado, there's none other but him. Right?
Yeah.
So for those keeping track of the Hebrew.
So by the time I got up, first thing I did was I led with my fear. I exposed all my fears at the beginning of my speech. I'm standing up here and I'm afraid because I needed to get that stuff out of the way, because that stuff was creating a tremendous amount of restriction.
Right. It's also the most real thing. If you're being real, the most real thing that's going on right then is that you are afraid. So being the most real is talking about that.
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah. And I was so present in that time, that period. On one hand, I see how afraid I am, but on the other hand, I know how much this can impact people. So the awareness of the impact was greater than my fear.
Even at that moment.
Even at that moment.
Because you had those events.
Yeah.
You hadn't shared it on a wide scale. I think there were there a couple thousand people in the audience? Is that what I remember?
I don't know exactly, but it was somewhere between 700 to 1,000 people.
Okay, I remember seeing the video of it, and there was a lot of people.
I remember getting I kind of blanked out, and then when I came to towards the end of my speech, and I looked around the room, I'm like, whoa. Like it was a lot.
Right,
I was just like focusing. Like my wife was sitting right there, and I saw my mother, and one other person, and that's all I was focusing on.
Right. So having had those earlier experiences one-on-one, or the experience you mentioned with the individual who referenced how something you shared on your sexual shame and overcoming that helped him, you said, okay, I know this has impact, and I'm going to do it on a much larger scale.
Yeah. That was the same for you?
Very similar. Yeah. Sometimes I have conversations with people, and in the first conversation, I say, I can never imagine doing a TED Talk on it. Like, that's not how this works.
You don't have to.
Right. First, you don't have to, but that's not how the process worked. By the time I addressed my porn addiction, I was so afraid of speaking publicly that when I shared in a meeting of 5 or 10 people, I was nervous.
Oh, wow.
So, right. I wasn't thinking about that.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was over years. I got to the point that I felt there was a lot of purpose and power in doing that, but it's not, it's not day one.
Right, right. Absolutely.
And it's not day 1,000 for most people either. Some people choose to take this path of sharing our story publicly.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful. I think in a certain level, I actually knew the impact, really knew the impact that I actually designated. I said, any impact that happens in this speech, I am doing it in the merit of my brother-in-law, Shua Polanski.
All right, who passed away from a virus.
Yeah, he passed away. So, I knew a lot. I guess somewhere inside me, I knew that I was going to do a lot. And I was like, okay, and he's chas. I wanted to go towards him and his family.
There's also something to be said for fear, I think. When something is bringing up that much fear, it's a suggestion that it's important in some way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So me not sharing or me being afraid to share had to do with anonymous. It was, I was just afraid, I'd never really talked publicly before. And I was going to be extremely vulnerable.
For the cliff notes of your story, and obviously I think there's still a link on YouTube so we can post to it, but just a little bit of it, so someone who's meeting it for the first time.
Sure. When I spoke publicly, I was sharing about my experience growing up and becoming addicted to alcohol and drugs, and then experiencing all the unmanageability and all of the consequences of addiction to eventually hitting a bottom and getting sober. Growing up with
the visual I have in my head maybe was something you said in that speech, maybe it was from another conversation, but something on a roof where you were standing on.
Yeah, that was the bottom. That was
the bottom was on a roof. How ironic.
Yeah. That is ironic. I was the alcohol and drugs wasn't working, so I had a constant internal pain or discomfort or dis-ease, which I understand now. I was just trying to not feel, and alcohol and drugs worked. I say drugs, I'm talking about weed. Like,
Right.
I mean, I dabbled with a couple other things, but nothing serious. And I think that day it just stopped working. It like came to a halt. Like it just stopped working. Also that day I had run out of weed and it was on a Yom Tov, so I couldn't pick up more. So I just drank a ton, no weed. So there just came a point where all my feelings just rose to the surface and I could not handle it. I was also behaving like incredibly shameful. I was treating my wife in a very disrespectful way and neurotic. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but yeah, I was being extremely disrespectful, and I was like kind of switching from being very angry to noticing how I'm behaving and feeling incredible shame. So I was kind of like actually,
So when you say it stopped working, you weren't getting the same feeling you once got from.
yeah.
Okay, so
yeah.
that's exactly my bottom in sex addiction. Was going through experiences, and I've spoken about it on this podcast and other conversations, where experiences that once brought me like to a real state of I don't know, numb or peace, whatever it felt like temporarily, stopped doing that, and the fear that came in when it didn't work was, I mean, it was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Was this was my go-to place for safety,
Yeah.
and it didn't work the way it always had.
Yeah.
What's next? Like
Yeah.
where to from here?
Yeah.
And that's what scared me, and that's what got me into my first meeting. So very similar to
Yeah.
your case.
I remember, so I'd gone to the roof, and on my way up, by the grace of God, I had the courage to call a brother of mine and say, "Come, please save me." Like
An actual brother.
an actual brother, yeah. So I was really like waving. I don't know if the word is waving, but I was like going back and forth from like this extreme to this shame and like. So I had a moment where I was like, "Wait, what am I doing?" As I'm like walking up the stairs, I'm like, "Wait," and I picked up the phone right away. "Please come help me. Stop me from doing something
Right, you scared
to
yourself.
hurt myself."
Right.
So he came real quick with one of the Hatzalah members, the emergency service community. How would you say that for somebody who doesn't know what Hatzalah is?
Yeah, it's a volunteer paramedic service.
Yeah. So he came there and they talked to me for a while. So I eventually went into his vehicle and he took me to a psychiatric ward. As I was getting into the car, I turned to my wife and said, like, I remember like really feeling this. It's great to bring it back. I really hope this works. Like, I don't know where I'm going, but there's nothing left. There's nothing left for me here.
Right.
Like, there's no, this way that I was trying is not working anymore. I don't know how I'm going to live. I really hope this works, because otherwise, I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And thank God it did.
Were others in your life before that time, like pulling you aside and saying something about your drinking? Was your wife bringing it up? Nothing.
Nothing. I was also like, there were times when I wasn't succeeding, I wasn't excelling, where people have told me, "Hey, dude, you gotta stop smoking weed. If you stop smoking weed, you'll start being you start getting some things done." But not like, "Hey, it looks like you have a problem. If you want any help," like nothing like that.
Got it.
I did attempt to try to stop, and I had support to try to stop when I did, but nothing was sustained.
When did the word addiction come into your field as maybe what I'm doing is an addiction?
I don't think that was in my vocabulary, the word addiction. There was one time, and I remember it so clearly, but I was laughing it off. I was with a friend of mine, and him and I were sitting like with like a 1.75 liter of Jack Daniels, just like knocking it down. He's also sober, also almost 10 years.
Congrats.
It's amazing. And I looked at him, I'm like, "Bro, we're alcoholic." And we were laughing about it, you know? It wasn't like, "Oh, I'm alcoholic and I have a problem and I got to do something about it." It was like we had a brotherhood and a camaraderie. Addiction wasn't a thing, but I definitely knew, like, I wanted to stop smoking weed and I could not. Every time I tried, I couldn't. I didn't even see alcohol as a real problem. I was sneaking it out. I was leaving work in the middle of the day to try to get a bottle and things like that. I knew that there was something to be ashamed of, to hide, but I didn't see it as like a problem until like it was like a week or two into rehab. I was like, wait, according to that, I'm alcoholic.
Oh, so when you went to rehab, it wasn't so much about I have a problem with alcohol, just my life is not working. I need help.
My life is not working. I need help with weed.
Weed was the.
Yeah, I need to go to rehab.
So can we talk about weed a little bit, because I don't have much experience with it. It's not been one of the problems I struggled with, but it seems like a lot of people kind of minimize it. It's not a big deal. I know people who have trouble with, harder drugs, cocaine, ketamine, stuff like that, and also weed, and like, oh, I'm sober, I'm only using weed, like
Right.
that. So can you bring us into a little bit of the world of weed and why there seems to be so much more minimization than other drugs, and why, and how you were able to recognize it was such a problem for you? Just
Yeah.
what is this weed thing?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm giving my opinion, right?
For sure, your experience.
My experience with weed was that it was a drug for me. The same thing it did for you, for your addiction, it did for me. Like when I smoked weed for the first time, I love this analogy that somebody gave once. So good. Imagine being in a room that there's like high machinery or like construction outside, or the air conditioner is on blast, and you don't realize it until somebody turns it off, and it's like, oh, peace. I didn't even realize how noisy it was until I took that.
This is exactly how I describe strip clubs. I walk in and all the noise stopped. That's exactly what I
Literally?
would say. 100. I've
Yeah.
used that phrase. I can't tell you how many times.
When I experienced that, I was so joyful. I was so joyful. Like I'm getting emotional thinking about it. Like I really needed that at the time. And I didn't even know how much I needed it. I was avoiding it. I was drinking a lot at the time. I was 19 years old. I'd been around weed already for 5 years. I refused. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm just a line I'm drawing in the sand. I'm not going to become a drug addict. At the time, that was my
Right. Alcohol was
conception.
more accepted in the the
Yes.
background, the culture we come from. Alcohol is more accepted.
Yeah, accepted and like, sure, yeah,
Right. Going into weed is a step.
yeah. Also, I was, 12, 13, 14 years old. I kind of look older. I was able to go to a bodega and buy alcohol. As soon as it goes to weed, first of all, there's a concept that it's a drug, and there has to be a dealer, and there has to be,
Right. Just going back 20 plus years ago.
yes,
Right? Very different environment.
yeah, it's very different today. So after I experienced that, I want more.
Right.
I want more, and I became a daily smoker really quickly because I wanted that peace. Oh wow, there's a possibility for me to live in the same noisy world with some quiet. So, and I'm not even looking to party all the time. I just wanted to continue doing everything I was doing till now, just with some peace and quiet. So, for me, weed is a drug, not because it has nothing to do with the weed. It has to do with what happens to me when I take it. So based on that, my opinion is that there's nothing wrong with weed. It could be great for people who are struggling with certain things like chronic illness and chronic pain and different things like that, so that they can actually function, right? And at the time, I was in a certain I was mentally ill, meaning like I was in a constant state of heightened pressure or fear or shame or anger, resentment, whatever it is. I was in a constant state of that. So for me, weed was a solution. The problem for me is that there's, first of all, there's side effects.
Such as?
If I am barely making ends meet and I'm spending money on weed, it's going to hurt the bank account. Like
Right.
it costs money. That's just on one level. On another level is it's, my wife would tell me a lot, and I could see it today, how it's very difficult to experience real intimacy when I'm on a drug, whether it's in conversation or any other way. Like there's some sort of, if the volume is off, if the volume has been turned off because to get rid of the noise, it's also going to turn off certain emotions. And vulnerability and intimacy is just less possible.
Yeah, I've used the expression with porn that for several days afterwards, I would feel like I'm in a bubble and I'm interacting with the world through a bubble.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. Almost like you have, the earplugs that you put in just to drown out the noise, but you could still hear things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I hear what you're saying, but can you say that again? Like I didn't really hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So intimacy, money, showing up for work was difficult, but also, there was also a lot of my drinking I was drinking like with Red Bull and beer and things like that. I would stay up until 3-4 o'clock in the morning every night. So this, I guess I can't really say it's about weed, but ultimately, like, it made it very difficult for me to function as somebody in the workforce.
Yeah, and often the problem with the drug is it's not where it takes you immediately; it's afterwards. It's the downs, not the ups.
Yeah.
If it had the ability to keep someone perpetually in a state of noiselessness, like why not?
Yeah,
But it doesn't.
Yeah, so if somebody doesn't mind being reliant on the substance, which means every time he travels somewhere, especially if it's illegal to take over borders, he's going to have to make sure that there's weed when he gets there. And for example, for me, when I did a stopover on my way to Australia, I had one of my good friends meet me at the airport so that on the layover, which was like an hour and a half, I can quickly run out of the airport, get into his car, smoke a couple of joints, and go back because from New York, you stop in California, and then you go to Australia. So these are just things that I had to do.
Right, and you start noticing the way it's not the 5 minutes of smoking, it's the hours of planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I'm reliant on anything outside of myself, then it's going to be part of my prep work. It's going to be part of the thing. And it's also going to be something, for example, that before I arrive in Australia, I'm asking my wife to make sure that I have weed when I arrive in Australia, even though she hates it. But she's kind of forced to do it. If she wants me to come there, she's going to have to get me some weed. Right. And because she doesn't, I'm upset at her.
Say the only thing worse than a drunk is a sober drunk?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Somebody who doesn't
like
have
a drunk
medication.
Without his, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
A drunk without his alcohol.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about someone in sobriety and recovery.
Yeah. Imagine you and I were having a conversation and I felt or believed that somebody was screaming in my ear. I'd be pretty frustrated and have a hard time talking to you. Yeah.
Right.
And that's what it was. Yeah. So, and there was one time that I tried to stop. And I had nightmares. I wanted a divorce like pretty quickly. I could not manage my emotions. I was like all over the place. There was no quiet. It was very noisy. Yeah.
Okay, so that's some of the story. You get the background.
Yeah.
You're talking about being on stage and sharing, and the process of sharing this, and how, and the ripple effect it had. Or the ripple effect you knew it was going to have. So can you speak to some of that? What have you seen afterwards? Say you're a coach. You run a successful coaching practice. You also have a coaching practice to train coaches to coach.
Yes. Yeah.
So was some of that influenced by you choosing to speak? Meaning, would you be doing those things today had you not grabbed the microphone?
I definitely wanted to. And I had already put effort into doing coaching. I was doing other work as well. So I had like my income, and then I had this thing on the side called coaching. That's actually how somebody called me out, because that's how I was actually presenting myself. Hi, I do bookkeeping and I work for a cash advance company and I do some coaching on the side. Right. And he's like, dude, you're a coach, like own it. And I couldn't. Anyway, so that's the way it was before.
You couldn't then. Today you do, Coach Moishe.
Yeah. That's it. Thank God. It's amazing. It's really, really what I'm meant to be doing.
So can you speak to that process immediately after the...
Yeah. First of all, I love that term that you said, the vulnerability hangover.
Right.
There really is a hangover.
Especially I haven't used here, but I use it all the time. Yeah,
I didn't have so much time to actually feel my feelings at the time, because I had instantly, I became full-time. People just calling me, meeting up with people, helping them, phone call, like just nonstop. nonstop. It was like for a while. People I meet in the street, all of a sudden they have somebody that they feel comfortable to talk
100%.
about something. And I was like, my whole self-concept was completely shifted. Like, apparently I'm this guy that people call. And people were sharing me things that is very different than my story, but they heard something. They're like, I identify with that feeling. I know what that's like. People with depression, people with, survivors of childhood sexual trauma. And, and I would meet with them and they would say thank you and it would be helpful for them. I'm like, that's amazing that I could do that. It was
right.
like
There's
the
a
high.
sense that you get a window into a part of the world that most people don't know exists. When you start sharing your story, then all of these people who you know or don't know, but you can be passing on the streets and interacting with in different ways, all of a sudden now they're honest with you.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's what's really going on here.
Yeah, that definitely is another thing. There came a certain point in time where I was walking down the street and I couldn't not see trauma everywhere. I could not see.
Right, you just hear one too many stories.
Yeah,
Like, wow.
hear too many stories, and then all of a sudden my intuition and my antennas are up, and I start seeing things and notice things, and please don't be careful when you meet me. I'm not assessing anything. I'm just happy to meet you. Okay. It's just like I eventually was able to like not need to see that, but that was a big part of that process, after speaking and so many people sharing things. And then, eventually I started being more present in social media and sharing things, and it continued. It just didn't stop. I got some support in like creating a coaching practice, and it's still till today. Till today, it's the same thing. People calling me, they see something I shared, and they feel safe and comfortable to talk to me about it, and I try to support them.
Yeah, we've overlapped a number of times with different people who've called me and called you, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Or at times when there was one situation where someone called me, they were in New York, they were in a tough spot, and I reached out to you.
Yeah.
Said, hey, this guy needs someone with him tonight.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm babysitting, but I'll figure this out. So I don't remember what happened, but I knew you took care of it.
I don't remember either. Baruch Hashem. I mean, we've done it a lot.
Yes.
We've done it a lot. Yeah.
You say you don't remember a lot. It's funny because people sometimes come to me and say like, oh, I was a person who reached out and said X, Y, and Z. I said, if I held on to every conversation, I'd be 450 pounds of filth, right? It's got to come in and go out. I don't remember. I remember names. I'll remember that I met the person before, but the specifics of the story, like,
there's certain things that I'll remember.
Sure.
But a lot of the stuff that, like you said, I can't keep that stuff in my conscious mind.
Right.
I can't function that way.
In terms of coaching today, so a lot of your story has been around addiction recovery, your coaching practice. What kind of people do you work with? What's your focus?
It's been my journey. My personal journey is completely in line with like my professional journey as well in coaching. So I started off in the self-help world, just getting support for myself around addiction. Well, first it was like suicide, but thank God, once I addressed the causes of my addiction, thank God I've had maybe a couple of episodes where I've considered or I had suicide ideation. But by the time I was out of rehab, I didn't have to feel the feeling alone. I already knew that there are people, and I already had phone numbers that I can call right away. Hey, I'm feeling this, even though I needed help at the time. Today, thank God, like when I feel these feelings, I know what it is and I know how to deal with it, and I don't need to always seek help for it.
Seek external help.
External help, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's always something I need to do, right? I can't just ignore it. So at first it was just addiction recovery, and my life became all about addiction recovery. And like I said about...
I mean, your personal life was all about addiction recovery, and then your professional, your career, who you were working with...
started becoming
people
that
with
as well,
recovery.
Yeah. But the more I was doing my own work, I started doing some deep therapeutic work with my therapist. We were doing the internal family systems therapy, and it was that took like all of my self-awareness and my internal freedom to a whole new level. And it benefited me so much that it made its way into my conversations with people. Like I'm talking to somebody and they're telling me they're struggling, and I have this perspective. It's going to come into the conversation. I'm just going to ask them questions, and they're going to be like, "Oh, wow," and that can help them. So I learned a little bit more. I read a couple of books, listened to a couple of audio books around IFS just to understand the model from like a structural perspective. But ultimately, like I worked the internal family systems therapy for like, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years. And full on.
You personally using it to help yourself.
Me and my therapist.
Right.
So barely missing therapy sessions. Like I said from the beginning in regards to the rehab, thank God part of my story is not like resting on my laurels and just like, no, I go in.
Right.
So I went in, I got vulnerable, I did the uncomfortable things in the sessions. So I benefited a lot from it, thank God. And that made its way into the coaching as well. So the impact that I was experiencing started making its way into the impact of the people I was working with as well. And the conversation started being less about just the drug or the 12 steps or, the addiction. It was also about beliefs and where they come from and parts and different therapeutic processes that can create freedom.
So once you went there, then the clients you were working with weren't limited to addiction recovery either.
Yeah. And then from there, it also went into a whole new coaching world, which I met my coach. His name is Fitz Rabin. Very unassuming. Like I see a guy in shul in synagogue. I come on Shabbos morning, and I had this thing where I just come in and hug people. I just love. It was pre-COVID. No, just kidding.
Over here, those references are missed in Florida, so we don't know what you're talking about.
I gave him a hug, and I was struggling at the time. Even though I was doing all the work, I was still kind of struggling with something specific that I wasn't working through. I knew it was a part of me. I knew there was like the effects of it, and I wasn't able to work through it.
Should I let this one go, or should I ask what? That's for specific.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy. Dude, I chose to do a podcast with you.
Right. What you see is what you got.
Yeah.
You know what you're walking into at this point.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Nothing to hide. I was doing the IFS work, and my wife and I had this dynamic where there were times that I needed her, or at least I had a part of me. Now I realize that, right? I had a part of me that felt like it really needed somebody, and the somebody was her. And if she wasn't available, I would experience her unavailability as rejection. Okay, so the neediness is inviting the expectation, whatever you call it. The neediness, the intensity of the neediness, and the unavailability is the extent of how I'm going to experience it as rejection. So in my mind, unavailability.
I have this part, but I have a louder part that says it doesn't exist. So keep talking.
What do you mean? That what doesn't exist?
I said I have this part that you're talking about, and I have a louder part that says this doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm joking, but keep talking.
Okay.
I wasn't looking to put the spotlight on me.
It's
nice that you're talking for me, meaning it's not like the whole audience. What you're saying is relevant to me at the moment.
Oh, wow.
Keep going.
So I gave him a hug, and so what was happening was in my relationship with my wife, there was like, for the first time in a long time, because I was already in sobriety for a long time, I was doing tons of work on myself. We couldn't have a good relationship, and we were having a very, very difficult time. We weren't angry at each other. I was just in complete hopelessness because I can't force my wife to be available for me, but I still feel incomplete.
Available emotionally, you're talking about, right?
Emotionally, intimately,
Everything.
whatever.
Okay.
But ultimately, there was this sense of neediness And I wanted her quality time to be there for me. I wanted her to be there for me.
And when that wasn't there, was the experience of a rejection,
a rejection,
of self.
yes. I experience her inavailability. I am being rejected. Even though she's not rejecting me,
Right,
but
I
I
understand.
feel rejected. And when I feel rejected, I experience incredible shame. I am unworthy, etc., etc. And then I want to just like find a corner and disappear. The thing is that I'll eventually get up because I have enough coping skills to get up and continue going. But then the neediness comes up again. And I'm like, no, I'm not, I can't ask for it. Because if I ask for it and the answer is no, I can't afford to experience that rejection again. So that happening multiple times over. And each time the fear and the concern of even asking became greater and the rejection greater, I slipped into a depression, a hopelessness. There's no hope for me. I'm gonna live the rest of my life with this emptiness.
And this is after recovery,
This is after recovery, yeah. And I'm not going to find
after coaching. Even you were helping people, you were speaking, you were in a better place.
I was absolutely struggling.
Comes up. Yes,
that was
the layers of the onion that are important to address. So you're feeling this hopelessness, and you run into this unassuming gentleman named Fitzraven.
Yeah, Fitzraven, love him. I give him a hug, and after we let go, I tell him I think we both needed that. I for sure needed it. Because it was like we hugged for like 2 minutes. That's a long time.
So not someone you knew before?
It's not something I would do for
that. No,
is
someone you knew or someone?
No, I met him maybe once or twice before.
Okay.
Never actually sat down and spoke to him, and I had no idea who he was or that he was a coach. It was just a guy in shul, and I loved hugging people, and that was like kind of my role. I felt like that was my role in the shul. I say hi to everybody. So he's in the middle of praying, and during prayer, we don't talk, right? So he wants to tell me something. So he pulls out Likutei Torah, which is a Hasidic
It's a Hasidic book. Yeah.
book, one of the fundamental books. And he points out a certain subject that he was learning that morning, which is applicable to that day. And he said, during this time of year, it was right before Rosh Hashanah, during this time of year,
So right before the Jewish New Year.
right before the Jewish New Year, this is a time for gathering on many levels. We gather back together with our purpose. We gather together as people, as families, us with God. There's like Atem Netzavim Hayim, right? This idea of like we're gathering together on all levels. So he's basically saying, oh yeah, that's why we're hugging.
Oh, okay.
We're hugging because we're gathering. This is the time for gathering.
Right. So after that, after you hug and you tell him, hey, we both needed that, he points to this Hasidic
Yeah, he's
book
like,
and
yeah,
says,
sure. This is actually pretty cool because this is actually
I was
where
just
we're
learning
at.
it. It's relevant to this period of time that we're in.
I felt invited to ask him a question, and I said, okay, so now's the time for gathering. What if a part of us or a part of our people doesn't want to gather together with the rest of the group, or
So you're asking both in the macro and the micro, both
yeah.
The
It was
people and
a
then-
very like
double entendre.
yeah.
Okay.
And he got it. He got it, and it was a very high level, if I could say, a high level conversation. Like I was speaking very metaphorically and like
Yes.
So he couldn't speak still, so he was like pointing in the sitter, like showing me imagine just having the ABC if you're somebody and just like pointing on the letters. But anyway, he says, so if there's a part that doesn't want to be part of, then we need to inquire. What's going on? What's bothering it? So I said, we know exactly what's bothering it. It's been hurt, and it just doesn't want to come back. Do you understand what I'm referring to, right? I want to connect, but I know that if I do, I'm going to feel hurt again, and I'm not willing to do that. So he said, when you invited, I said, this part, yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you for your love. I appreciate it. Really do appreciate it. Thank you for your love. But I'm not going to go back to the place that I'm going to get hurt again. Even though you are welcoming. And I would love to gather. But I just don't want to get hurt. so I'm not going to join you. So he said, in that case, you got to be with it. Be with the part. I'm like, be with it? What do you mean be with it? Aren't we put into this world to work, to fix, to repair? And he said, that is the work. In that moment, I was in tears, and I gave him a hug. What he taught me was that it takes tremendous work to really be with something without the need to fix it. For somebody who is experiencing neediness and brokenness and rejection and loneliness, to have somebody who's present with them with zero need to fix them, that's work. To be able to show up in somebody's life in a way where whatever it is that this person is doing and wherever they are is perfect for right now. To have the presence of somebody like that in my life is healing. And that's work.
And in this metaphor, it's you being that for that internal part.
For me to be, because who was I being with the part of me that was feeling the rejection? I was being that I have to fix it.
Right. The parent who needs to change it, yes.
Right. And the part of me was like, I don't want to be, stop looking at me as if I'm broken. Because you looking at me as if I'm broken is creating the need for me to find validation and somebody else to fix me.
Fascinating.
So that really moved me. And then that really opened things up for me. And after...
Was this fear of rejection, if to use that language, you didn't use it, but I will. Correct me if you use something else. Was that fear of rejection extending beyond your wife into business, into your
definitely
personal life?
Yeah, here was most personal, and
sure.
And I can't, like, this is my wife. Like,
no, 100%.
I'm not going to look for what I'm looking for in my wife. I'm not considering it an option to find it anywhere else. That's the only difference that makes this more unique and makes it spiral more.
Right. My question was different. So say someone is experiencing fear of rejection, or someone has a fear of rejection, then it'll show up in their intimate relationship in one way, and maybe in terms of reaching out to a client in a completely different way.
Totally. Yeah. All I'm saying is that when it's outside of something like a personal relationship, somebody who I'm committed for the rest of my life, if it's a client, okay, I won't call this client, I'll call another client. I could avoid it. Here, there was no avoiding. This is a person that I'm committed to spending the rest of my life with. I see her every single day. So that's just why I feel like it spiraled more.
Right. No, it makes it much more real, but the problem
is the same.
Right. Is out there.
100%.
And then in resolving it there, it changes something on the outside.
Yeah. 100%. Right. Yeah.
This is very relevant to me. If the cameras were off and the mics were in here, this conversation would be worthwhile.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would say that a fear of rejection is probably one of the deepest and most integral fears that I have. Mm. But then I alluded to the fact that there's a louder voice that says it's not even there. So
Right. So parts would say that you have a part of you that's a fear of rejection. You have from a more centered, holistic, or let's say godly place, you have an aspiration to actually go somewhere, right? Or do something.
Correct.
Then you have a part of you that's afraid of rejection. So there's a calling, there's a bottleneck, or whatever, there's a thing. And then there's a third part that has to create some sort of consolidation. It has to reconcile. I have to reconcile this. On one hand, I want to go. On the other hand, I'm too afraid. So we have two opposing forces, which normally would just create anxiety, or which ultimately is another part saying, hey, there's a problem.
Right.
But then if there's a problem, then another part comes in and says, no, guys, I'm in charge today. You are not a problem. I know that you're here, but I'm going to shut you up.
Okay.
And I'm going to just, as a coping skill, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make as if and pretend and take actions and speak as if you don't exist. And it works.
So what does that feel like today? If use your wife as an example, but if you experience the exact same facts, you wanting something, I don't love the word neediness. Wanting something from her and it isn't reciprocated in the exact same way that before you perceived this rejection. What is that experience today?
Yeah, I want to open it up a little bit more. Okay,
good.
First of all, I specifically do use neediness. And the reason why I use neediness is because when I just want something and I don't get it, I don't experience it as rejection. It's coming from a place of lack. When I use the word needy, that's what I'm talking about. It's coming from an orientation as if I don't have, I am lacking, or I am broken, and I need fixing. It's like a vacuum. So when something blocks the vacuum, there's going to be like a serious resistance and serious damage. Right. So this part of me that feels that need, it still comes up till today. I will be in the middle of talking to my wife, or or even being intimate, and I feel it viscerally, and I'll pause. I'll literally, in the middle of a conversation or middle of wherever we are privately, I'll close my eyes. I'll be with that part of me. I'll notice it, and like I'm just committed to not coming from that. Like it's not my wife's problem. I need to fix that stuff so that I can love my wife. I need to fix that stuff so instead of me needing my wife, I can love her. I can be.
You fix that or be with that, or has that changed?
Fix that. Yeah, it's be with that. Meaning not have her fix me.
Understood. I need to deal with that.
I need to deal with that. So I'll prioritize that. So if I'm having a conversation with her or I'm interacting with her in an intimate way, I will pause. Sometimes multiple times in one conversation, I'll pause, be with it. And sometimes it could take like a couple seconds. And sometimes if it's really intense, it may take a couple of minutes. And sometimes we'll stop. We'll end the conversation.
Is there a way to get this part?
I think there is, yeah, if I do it proactively. If I were to do like a daily meditation every single morning and I say good morning to that part of me, hey, is there anything you need today?
Oh, understood. Then
yeah, do it in a proactive way. Yes, 100%.
So from the IFS model, these parts that like once you identify it, they're always going to be there. Maybe different volumes.
Yeah, again, so this is my experience. They're always going to be there, but let's say they'll go to sleep.
Right.
So even from a neuroscientific perspective, when we have a certain experience or we have a story or we have a story about the story, but ultimately there's a neural pathway. There's a pathway that's been paved, whether it's been gone through many times for years or it's only gone a couple of times, but somebody's walked that path. I imagine a cornfield, right? So it's perfect, but once somebody takes a tractor and goes through it, it's just never going to be the same unless it regrows, right? Even if you just go through it one time, the pathway is there.
Understood.
So if it's something that I've believed for a long time, so there's a part of me that's experiencing that neediness. What's that neediness coming from? I understand today. It's not just a part of me, but it's the part of me comes from a story that I have about myself. But I have a habit of believing that about myself. It's habitual. I come into a certain scenario. I have a habit of believing something about myself, and that neural pathway, whatever, that habit, it's just if I'm being instinctive or if I'm not being conscious and proactive about my self-concept and what I'm thinking of myself, then I'm going to go in a default mode, right? So if I've believed something about myself, or if I had a traumatic experience and those traumatic experiences created beliefs about myself and I've been believing that for a long period of time, then again, from a neuroscientific perspective, the neural pathway is there.
So it's going to come back.
It's always going to come back unless I create another pathway alongside it and I really work on it a lot to make that highway more wide and more paved and more lit up.
Then more likely to go
so
down.
There's more likely that the water will flow down that than the other way.
Understood.
Right. So will it stay with me forever? Possibly. Will it become part of the disruption of my mission and my purpose and what I want to actually achieve in life? Probably not.
Okay, so let's segue there because that's literally the next question
Cool.
I was going to go to was, is there a larger, if we zoomed out,
Yeah.
right, Coach Moishe Chanin,
Yeah.
is there a larger mission and purpose to all this? What is this? What is all of this about for you? You're sharing your story, you're telling it, you're helping people. Okay, so what?
That zooming out is nonstop. It never stops. So, it was first, I just want to work with people who are suffering from addiction. I want to help them. My consciousness and my awareness also expands. There's nothing that has come close to the expanded awareness that I experience on so significantly than learning Chassidus. When I learn something that the Rebbe teaches, it takes my zooming out and it just it just opens it up so much more. It boggles my mind, and it's also done in such a simplified way. So, this perspective that I was sharing with you earlier, right? So, I didn't say it in the podcast before we were recording. So I'm a coach, and I want to help people, and there's also a business. I have to, I'm making a living, and I'm helping other people, and I'm on social media, and I'm public speaking, and I'm doing workshops, and there's this coming back and forth that happens for me. I have to make money. On the other hand, I know that if I speak to people and if I do these things, it has an impact, right? So I'll move from okay, I got to make money, I got to, collect money, whatever it is. And then I'll hustle so much that I'll get exhausted and I forget about this whole purpose thing, right?
I mean, at this point in time, you're no longer the guy in cash advances coaching on the side. Today, this is how you support your family.
Yeah. Right. So I start hustling and I forget about, I'll start saying no to people that I can really help because I need the income. Right? Or So I find myself 1 month I'll be working on that, and then I come back and then I share something with somebody, or I speak publicly, or share something on social media, and I'm reminded oh my gosh, this is so meaningful. I want to do this more, right? So I sat down and learned a sikha one time. I actually learned it that year in Mexico.
All right.
Yeah. I learned it one time then, and it impacted me that for all these years, I've always wanted to go back and learn it again. But I never did until just a couple months ago.
So sikha, just for those who that's a new word to. So it's another, it's a Hasidic philosophy as well, introduced by a different rabbi than you spoke about earlier.
Yeah, so this is based on a discourse that the Lubavitcher Rebbe had given publicly. And the Rebbe is offering a perspective, okay? There is a commandment in the Torah to create a city of refuge. It's called the Ari Miklat. If somebody had mistakenly hurt somebody else, and somebody from their family or somebody wants to hurt him, he needs a place that he can run to so that he can have refuge, and then they can figure out who's at fault. Is this person innocent? Is he not? Whatever it may be. Okay, so he has to have a place to run to.
One person hurts or injures or murders another person accidentally.
Yeah.
He has a place of refuge that he can.
Yeah, where he's protected there. So one of the commandments and the instructions are that there should be big, wide paths and roads to get there, and it should be very easy for people to get there. And in every juncture, every time that there's some sort of a fork in the road, there should be a big, huge sign that's really visible that says Miklat, Miklat.
Right.
The refuge, the city of refuge.
City of refuge is this way.
Is this way.
Got it.
And
so this is a biblical commandment, right?
Yes, this is a biblical commandment. Yeah.
And as with every biblical commandment, there's a million laws attached to it.
Yes.
And some of those laws is make the city of refuge, but don't hide it. Right? Don't. Someone shouldn't have to sneak to get there. Big wide roads, brightly lit.
Yeah.
Clear street signs.
Yeah. So everything. Also, this is a perspective. Everything that we learn in the Bible, everything that we learn in the Torah is meant to be a lesson for our daily practice today. So the Rebbe is proposing how does that happen? So so what he says is that there are different types of signs. The city of refuge is the Bible, is spirituality, and when somebody is confused or they've done something, they feel shame or whatever it is, they can find refuge from safety from any threats if they go deeper into spirituality. Okay?
So the city of refuge on a spiritual dimension references a space a space of safety that's created for people who are struggling with
whatever it is.
Mental,
spiritual, and emotional challenges. When they feel threatened, right? So they have a place to go to. So what are the signs? So the Rebbe is proposing that we have the capacity to there are different types of signs. There's a sign that's just like an object, and then there are living signs. So there were leaders in the last a few hundred years from the Baal Shem Tov. He's the first one to be a living sign, but there were other incredibly righteous people that they just stayed in their place. Anybody who wants their help would come to them. They wouldn't go out of their way. And the Baal Shem Tov was the first person to actually go out of his way to become a living sign, one that is it's not just that
it's not a rock on the side of the road. It's a person who's moving.
Yes, and it's alive and it's living.
Right. To further explain this, within Judaism, there's different philosophies or ways of life, ways of going. Not for you, for the audience. And some believe in more of a okay, we're going to live in a ghetto style and protect ourselves from the outside elements, and others are going to say, no, we're going to go out and interact with those outside elements and refine them.
Yeah.
A little bit. So this is what you're talking about. The living signpost is, okay, there's a rock in a ghetto, right? But there's also the...
One of the examples that he gives is a clock. So there's different levels. So one is just like a stone, and another one is like a clock where it seems to be moving, like one of those grandfather's clocks, right? It's moving, but it's staying in one place.
Right.
And then there's like really living.
Like a plant.
A plant. Yeah, it's staying in one place. It's not moving.
Right.
And then there's like a neon sign
not moving,
with sound and so the Rebbe is proposing that we could be a sign. If you are somebody who you want God's help, you be a sign for other people and God will take care of you. Like the kamayim apanim, like just like the water reflects the image, the same thing God reflects the way we behave with others. He will reflect the same to us. So one of the ways that we as people who are more conscious and more aware about the thing, like we don't necessarily need to run to the Ari Miklat. We are people who know about it and we are aware. So if we want help from God, we should be like one of those signs, right? So that's one discourse, and I'm going to give you a short version of a separate one. The separate one was there's Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers. There's two Mishnahs. How would you say that? I don't know. There's two sayings. Okay, one is if somebody learns the Bible and doesn't have any income, eventually whatever he learns is going to disappear, right? Okay, why? Just logically, if somebody doesn't have income, they're going to have to figure out a way, and it will probably bring them to steal or do things that are unethical. So whatever it is that they learn is going to be worthless.
Meaning it's going to be very difficult to be a righteous person without some income.
Yeah, you can't be a spiritual being without
being learning Torah all
physical...
day, but if you don't have food, you're gonna do
it's
what
just
you
not
need
sustainable.
To do to get it. Right.
The second one is Ezel Chacham Alayim Mikol Adam, which is who is a wise person, somebody who's able to learn from every single person. Okay, so first the Rebbe says that who is a person. First of all, what is Torah? What is Melacha? So what is Bible metaphorically, and what is work? So the Baal Shem Tov explains that work is being involved with, obviously, Israel, with loving another. You have to love somebody else. You have to be giving of what you have. If you don't give what you have, you're going to lose it. That's
Keep what we
ultimate.
have by giving it away.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. The second one is Ezo Chacham Le'im Mikal, who is wise, the person who learns from every person. He's saying that the rabbi just comes from the other side. Says, oh, so 1 second. So if who is wise is somebody who learns from every person, so every person has something that he could teach the wise person. So every single person has something that they are rich in, that they can have, that they can give. Right? So if I don't give what I have, I'm going to lose it.
Right. And we're also impoverishing the world a little bit.
Absolutely.
That's
So
what I thought you were going to say.
If I do give what I have, I'm going to get more. Okay? So not only am I going to keep what I have, I'm going to end up getting more. And you know this. You've done this. Not only do you get to keep the growth, your personal growth, by you giving to others, you're not just keeping what you have, you grow more.
100%.
And lastly, just about this whole thing, is that the Rebbe says that if you make it your business, his askos means like you make it a business. When you want to make a business, you don't just have your merchandise in the top in your attic and you're hoping that somebody's going to know that you have it and know that it's good for them. No, you open up a store on a busy street, similar to the other one, right? Open up a store on a busy street and you stand outside and you let people know about your product. And you let people know that it's good for them, and you let them taste it, and you let them try it. And once they try it, you know that you've fully completed your mission when one of your customers become your salesman. Okay? So that's basically what the Rebbe's teaching. Once I got this perspective, all of my fears of rejection, all of my things like, no, this is my business. It has to become my business to give of what I have. And it's not like I'm here because there's something that I'm afraid that you're not going to give me.
All of these concepts were from one discourse?
From two discourses.
Discourses. Okay, so you...
Yeah. I combined them two because
Right.
I was just in that frame of mind.
Understood.
And this is like a total of maybe 8 pages. And this entire perspective is created for me, which, by the way, I'm only saying like the main points from it.
Understood.
So first of all, it expands my vision to see, like I visualize being a sign. I visualize being that businessman who his full stock of something that's really good, and he's not here to take. He's just here to give. God will take care of him, but he just needs to give. So a lot of the fears of rejection, a lot of my concerns about what people will think of me, a lot of the how am I going to do this? Do I even have something to offer?
Right, all of that was put to the
All
side.
of that is get put aside in a second, and my entire visual is just clear, and my actions are clear, which is what gets me to call you and say, hey, Eli, I really want to be on your podcast. I've wanted to be on your podcast for a while, but there's just been stuff in the way, you know.
Right.
Oh, he only has these big, you know, people on this thing, you know, and what am I going to say? And he's going to ask me questions that I'm going to be scared to answer. Well, you know, that opens up a lot, you know. So from going from recovery from addiction to therapy, IFS, and then coaching and learning these things. And I'm working with somebody, Fitz. He's also somebody that, you know, we've learned these things together. One of our sessions was pulling out, actually 2 of our sessions, we pulled out this discourse and we learned it together.
Oh, neat.
That was the session. So we were able to get super clear on what needs to be done. And it's therapeutic for me as well. It just expands. And so right now, I'm just like, I want to meet people and I want them to know that they have something to give. And that the gift that I have to give is to let people know
That they have something.
that they have something to give. And when they give what they have, and they become the source for other people to also know that they have a gift to give, and they have the capacity to, and the empowerment to, and the resources to give it, and it's their business, make it your business to give it. And you can, and all the blessings and everything that you need, all your income is going to happen. And it could happen through here or another way. But the income that you need to have is going to happen in the process of you serving people in this fundamental way.
This is huge.
Yeah.
Huge. So I'm really happy that you reached out and you've chosen to use this platform as one of the many ways to share the living embodiment of a signpost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. There's much more than you have much more to offer than just what you said. Right. That you have something to offer. There's much more behind that. But
yeah. There's
yes,
so much more that I wanted
yes.
to share. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
At the right time.
Someone said it's not even your highest offering, to borrow a line I heard from someone else. But it's a beautiful offering. It's definitely a beautiful offering. So thank you so much for sharing your message on this. We certainly don't try to have the objective for me is, like on the podcast in terms of guests, for others listening, it's more just in line with where I am. I'm not like this in search of more is kind of like my personal journey and putting it out there. It's not, if I have a guest that's more popular, it usually has something to do with either where I am or with an impact they made on my life. But it's not about that. It's about sharing the journey. And in some ways, our journeys have, there's been a connection point in our journey over the years. Although we don't talk that often, there's been this guy in New York who did something similar to what I did. And there were many times where people who reach out to me mentioned your name, or people were talking to me, said, yeah, I've been working with Moishe, or I spoke to him and he helped me get started on this path in some way. So it's perfect. You're a perfect guest for this this podcast. And I'm glad you chose to share some of your story here. And I hope the next time you come back in Florida, we do this again.
Yeah, I love that.
And share some more of these offerings.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.